The blood dripped down Clara O'Malley's cheek as she struggled to stay upright, her knees threatening to buckle under her. She hadn't meant to fall asleep during her shift at the Silver Dollar Saloon, but exhaustion had claimed her after working 3 consecutive 16-hour days. Now, Barton Wade, the saloon owner, stood over her, his meaty fist raised for another blow. "Worthless girl," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "I don't pay you to sleep on my time." Clara tried to shield herself, her slender arms raised in a futile defense. The other girls watched in fearful silence, none daring to intervene. In Silverton, Colorado in 1878, a saloon girl had few protections and even fewer options. "Please, Mr. Wade," she whispered. "It won't happen again." The slap never came. Instead, a large hand caught Wade's wrist mid-swing. Clara peered through her fingers to see a tall stranger holding her employer's arm in a grip that made Wade's face contort with pain. "That's enough," the stranger said, his voice low and controlled, yet it carried through the suddenly silent saloon. "No more hands will ever touch this woman like that again." Clara had never seen him before. His sandy hair fell in waves beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes were the clear blue of a mountain lake. Dust covered his denim and leather clothing, suggesting he'd ridden far, but the revolver at his hip looked well maintained and ready for use. Wade wrenched his arm away, rubbing his wrist. "This ain't your business, stranger. This girl works for me. Not anymore, she doesn't." The man's eyes never left Wade's face. "What's your name, miss?" Clara swallowed, tasting blood. "Clara O'Malley, sir. I'm Yates Jackson." He tipped his hat slightly. "And I believe you're coming with me." Clara hesitated, caught between fear of the unknown and the certainty of Wade's continuing abuse. Behind Wade, the bartender reached under the counter, likely for the shotgun kept there. "Don't," Yates said, not looking at the bartender but somehow aware of his movement. "Unless you want to explain to the undertaker how you got those fancy buttons blown through your spine." The bartender's hand emerged empty. Wade's face had turned an ugly purple. "You can't just walk in here and take my property." "She's not property," Yates said, "and I'm not asking." He turned to Clara. "Get your things. We're leaving." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She hurried to the small room she shared with 2 other girls, gathering her meager possessions into a worn carpet bag while her mind raced. Who was this stranger? Why was he helping her? Where would they go? When she returned to the main floor, Yates stood exactly where she'd left him, his stance relaxed but ready. Wade glowered from behind the bar, nursing a drink and his wounded pride. "You'll regret this," Wade called as Yates guided Clara toward the door, one hand protectively at the small of her back. "Nobody crosses Barton Wade in Silverton." Outside, the afternoon sun made Clara wince. Her eye was swelling shut and her lip was split. Yates studied her face with a frown. "Can you ride?" he asked. Clara nodded. She'd grown up on a small farm outside of Denver before her parents died of influenza 3 years ago. At 22, she'd been forced to make her own way in the world. Good. Yates led her to a magnificent Palomino stallion tethered outside the saloon. He secured her bag and helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The horse snorted and pranced, powerful muscles bunching beneath them. "Where are we going?" Clara finally asked as they rode out of town, past curious onlookers. "My ranch," Yates replied. "About 10 miles outside of town." "You'll be safe there." "Why are you helping me?" She couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return, because no one deserves to be treated like that. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "And because I've been looking for help around the ranch. My housekeeper could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing to work." Clara relaxed slightly. Work she understood, work she could do. "I'm willing." Then we'll get along just fine, Miss O'Malley. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals spread across a verdant valley. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and a creek glinted in the late afternoon sun. "Welcome to the Lazy J," Yates said as they rode down toward the buildings. An older woman emerged from the main house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes crinkled with warmth when she saw Yates. "You're back early," she called. Then her expression changed as she noticed Clara. "Lord above, what happened to this girl?" "Martha, this is Clara O'Malley," Yates said as he dismounted and helped Clara down. "She'll be staying with us. Clara, this is Martha Wilson, the finest housekeeper and cook in Colorado Territory." Martha clucked her tongue as she examined Clara's face. "Come inside, child. We need to tend those wounds." She shot Yates a questioning look. "Barton Wade," was all he said, but it was enough. Martha's lips thinned. "That man's a menace," she muttered, guiding Clara toward the house. "Don't you worry, Miss O'Malley. You're safe here." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and bright quilts adding touches of color. Martha sat Clara at the kitchen table and brought a basin of water and clean cloths. "Yates, make yourself useful and fetch my medicine box from the pantry," she ordered. He complied without protest, and Clara wondered at the easy relationship between them. As Martha gently cleaned her wounds, Clara learned that Martha had been with Yates since he was a boy. She'd been the housekeeper for his parents and had stayed on after they died in a stagecoach accident 5 years ago, leaving the ranch to their only son. "He's a good man," Martha said quietly as Yates stepped outside to speak with one of his ranch hands. "One of the few. You can trust him." Clara wasn't so sure. In her experience, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But for now, she had nowhere else to go. That night, Clara slept in a clean bed in a room of her own for the first time in years. Despite her aches and the strangeness of her situation, exhaustion pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtains and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then the previous day's events came rushing back. She touched her face gingerly. The swelling had gone down some, but her eye was likely a spectacular shade of purple. After washing in the basin provided, Clara dressed in her cleanest dress and made her way to the kitchen. Martha was at the stove and Yates sat at the table with a cup of coffee and the ledger book open before him. "Good morning," Clara said hesitantly. Yates looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. "Morning, Miss O'Malley. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." She stood awkwardly, unsure of her place. "Sit down, child," Martha said, gesturing to the table. "Breakfast is almost ready and we need to put some meat on those bones." Over a hearty meal of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, Yates outlined what he expected from Clara in exchange for room and board. "Martha runs the house and I won't interfere with her domain," he said. "You'll help her with whatever she needs cooking, cleaning, mending. I pay fair wages and you'll have Sundays to yourself." He paused. "Does that sound acceptable?" It was more than acceptable. It was better than Clara had dared hope for. "Yes, Mr. Jackson, thank you." "Yates," he corrected. "Mr. Jackson was my father." After breakfast, Martha showed Clara around the house, explaining her duties. The work wasn't easy, but it was fair, and Martha was patient. By midday, Clara had helped prepare lunch for the ranch hands, learned where the cleaning supplies were kept, and begun tackling a pile of mending. She caught glimpses of Yates throughout the day as he went about his business, conferring with his foreman, checking on a mare about to foal, examining fence lines that needed repair. He moved with easy confidence, respected by his men without having to demand it. Days passed, settling into a routine. Clara's face healed, the bruises fading from purple to yellow to gone. She found herself smiling more, laughing at Martha's dry humor, enjoying the simple satisfaction of work well done. A week after her arrival, Clara was hanging laundry when Yates rode in, covered in dust from the range. He dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn, but paused when he saw her. "You look better," he said, approaching the clothesline. Clara touched her cheek self-consciously. "I feel better." "Good." He shifted, suddenly awkward in a way she hadn't seen before. "I'm heading into town tomorrow. Thought you might want to come along, get a few things. Martha mentioned you could use some fabric for new dresses." Clara hadn't expected such thoughtfulness. "That would be nice. Thank you." He nodded and continued to the barn, leaving Clara to wonder at the strange fluttering in her chest. The next day, they rode into Silverton together. Clara was nervous about encountering Barton Wade, but Yates assured her they wouldn't be anywhere near the silver dollar. "Besides," he added with a grim smile, "Wade knows better than to cross me." The general store was their first stop. Yates instructed Clara to select whatever she needed: fabric, thread, a new hairbrush, soap that smelled of lavender rather than lye. When she protested at the expense, he waved her concerns away. "You're earning your keep," he said. "This is part of your wages." At the dressmaker's shop, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Fletcher helped Clara select patterns for 2 new dresses. As Mrs. Fletcher took measurements, she chatted amiably. "So you're working out at the Lazy J now? That's a fine place. Yates Jackson runs a respectable operation." She glanced toward the front of the shop where Yates waited, examining a display of buttons with puzzled interest. "And he's quite the catch, if you don't mind my saying so. Half the unmarried ladies in the county have set their caps for him, but he doesn't seem to notice." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that, I just work there." Mrs. Fletcher gave her a knowing smile. "Of course, dear. Now, I think this blue calico would be lovely with your eyes." Their last stop was the bank, where Yates needed to conclude some business. As Clara waited on a bench outside, a shadow fell across her. "Well, look who's here. Wade's runaway." Clara looked up to see 2 men from the silver dollar regulars who had often made unwelcome advances. She stood, glancing around for Yates, but he was still inside. "I didn't run away," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I left." The taller man, Jenkins, stepped closer. "Wade's still mighty sore about how you left. Might be willing to forgive you if you come back and apologize real nice-like." Clara backed up. "I'm not going back." Jenkins reached for her arm. "Don't be difficult now," his words cut off as his wrist was caught in a vise-like grip. Yates had appeared silently beside them, his expression cold. "I believe the lady said no," he said quietly. Jenkins tried to pull away. "This ain't your concern, Jackson. Miss O'Malley works for me now. That makes it my concern." Yates released Jenkins with a slight shove. "Tell Wade if he has a problem, he can take it up with me directly." The men retreated, muttering threats under their breath. "Are you all right?" Yates asked Clara, his anger fading to concern. She nodded, though her heart still raced. "Thank you." "Let's get home," he said, placing a protective hand at the small of her back as they walked to their horses. Home. The word echoed in Clara's mind as they rode back to the Lazy J. When had she started thinking of the ranch as home? That evening after dinner, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Yates joined her, offering a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "I spoke with Sheriff Donovan while you were at the dressmaker's," he said after a comfortable silence. "Told him about Wade's treatment of you and the other girls. He's going to keep an eye on the situation." "It won't change anything," Clara said softly. "Men like Wade always find ways around the law." Yates studied her profile in the fading light. You've had a hard time of it, haven't you?" Something in his tone made Clara look at him. The genuine concern in his eyes broke something loose inside her, a dam of emotions she'd kept carefully controlled for years. "After my parents died, I tried to keep our farm going," she began. "But the bank foreclosed when I couldn't make the payments. I tried working as a seamstress, a laundress, a maid, but the pay was never enough." She swallowed hard. "The silver dollar paid better, and Wade promised I'd only be serving drinks, nothing more." "But that changed," Yates guessed. Clara nodded. "He started demanding more. Said I owed him for room and board, that I had to work it off. When I refused, well, you saw how he handled refusals." Yates's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "No one will hurt you like that again, Clara. I promise you that." The use of her first name, so natural and yet so intimate, made her breath catch. "Why do you care what happens to me? You didn't know me a month ago." He was quiet so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I had a sister, younger than me by 2 years. After our parents died, she went to Denver to work while I took over the ranch. The letters stopped coming after a while when I went to find her." He didn't need to finish. Clara could guess the rest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." He set his cup down with deliberate care. "I was too late for Emily, but I wasn't too late for you." Later, lying in bed, Clara replayed their conversation. There had been something in Yates's eyes when he looked at her, something that made her feel both vulnerable and protected at the same time. It frightened her a little, this growing awareness of him not just as her employer, but as a man. A man she was beginning to care for more than she should. Summer bloomed across the valley, bringing long days of sunshine and hard work. Clara fell into the rhythm of ranch life, finding satisfaction in tasks completed and skills improved. Martha taught her to make bread that rose light and golden, to preserve the bounty of the kitchen garden for winter, to manage a household with efficiency and grace. And always, there was Yates. He included her more and more in the daily operations of the ranch, teaching her to keep the accounts, asking her opinion on household purchases, bringing her small gifts from his trips to town, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers that he pretended Martha had asked for, but that always ended up in a jar on Clara's windowsill. One evening in July, Clara sat on the porch steps shelling peas when Yates rode in with his foreman, Thomas. They were discussing the upcoming cattle drive to Denver, and Clara tried not to eavesdrop, but Thomas's voice carried. "You sure you don't want me to lead this one, boss? You haven't been to Denver since." "Since Emily," Yates finished. "I know, but it's time I faced it. Besides, I need you here to oversee the hay cutting." They noticed Clara then, and Thomas touched his hat in greeting before continuing to the bunkhouse. Yates came to sit beside her on the steps. "You're leaving?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Just for a couple of weeks. We've got 300 head to get to market before prices drop." He picked up a pea pod and split it open with his thumbnail. "I'd feel better if you stayed close to the ranch while I'm gone." "Wade's been making noise in town." Clara's hands stilled. "What kind of noise?" "Nothing specific. Just drunk talk about settling scores." Yates dropped the peas into her bowl. "Thomas and the boys will keep an eye out, and Martha could drop a mountain lion with that shotgun of hers." Despite his light tone, Clara could see the concern in his eyes. "I'll be careful," she promised. The night before Yates was to leave with the herd, a summer storm rolled across the valley. Rain lashed the windows and lightning split the sky. Clara couldn't sleep, worried about the cattle drive facing such weather. A particularly loud crash of thunder sent her to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a figure hurrying from the barn to the house. Moments later, Yates appeared in the kitchen, dripping wet. "Mercy, boy!" Martha exclaimed, emerging from her room in a nightgown and wrapper. "What were you doing out there?" "Checking on that new colt," Yates said, shaking water from his hat. "He gets spooked by storms." Clara brought him a towel from the linen cupboard. "You're soaked through. It's coming down like Noah's flood out there." He accepted the towel with a grateful smile. "We'll have to delay the drive by a day or two if this keeps up." Martha put on the kettle for tea. "No sense catching your death before you even start." "Miss Clara, fetch one of his dry shirts from the washing basket. I just ironed them this afternoon." Clara hurried to do as asked, returning with a clean shirt to find Yates had removed his sodden one. She stopped short at the sight of his bare chest, muscled and tanned from outdoor work, a few old scars telling stories of ranch accidents or fights. Heat rushed to her face, and she thrust the shirt at him, avoiding his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, and she thought she detected amusement in his voice. Martha poured tea, and the three of them sat at the kitchen table listening to the storm. It was strange and intimate, this middle-of-the-night gathering, with rain drumming on the roof and thunder rolling across the mountains. "I was thinking," Yates said after a while, "that Clara might want to take over more of the bookkeeping. She has a good head for figures." "That she does," Martha agreed. "And it would free you up for other things when you get back." They discussed it as if Clara weren't there, planning her future at the Lazy J as if it were a foregone conclusion that she would stay. The realization warmed her more than the tea. When the storm finally subsided and they prepared to return to bed, Yates caught Clara's hand as she turned to go. "I'll be back before the end of the month," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Will you be here?" It was more than a casual question, and they both knew it. "Yes," Clara said. "I'll be here." The day after Yates left with the cattle drive, Martha took to her bed with a summer cold. Clara took over the household duties entirely, bringing Martha broth and tea, changing her linens, and managing everything from the kitchen garden to the ranch accounts. She was hanging out washing one morning, a week after Yates's departure, when she spotted a cloud of dust on the road from town. Shading her eyes, she made out a buggy approaching at speed. Clara's stomach knotted with apprehension. Few people came to the Lazy J uninvited, and never at such a pace. She hurried inside to check on Martha, who was dozing, then returned to the porch just as the buggy pulled up. Barton Wade climbed down, followed by Jenkins and another man from the saloon. All three looked the worse for drink, though it was barely noon. "Well, well," Wade said, his gaze traveling over Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "Here you are playing house with Jackson." Clara stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Jackson isn't here. You need to leave." Wade laughed, an ugly sound. "I don't think so." "See, you still owe me, girl. For room and board for the customers you disappointed when you ran off. I've come to collect." "She said leave," came Martha's voice from the doorway. She stood there in her nightgown, pale and trembling, but the shotgun in her hands was steady. "This is private property." Wade eyed the shotgun, then glanced at his companions. 3 against one old woman and a girl he clearly liked the odds. "Put that down before you hurt yourself, Grandma. I've been shooting jackals like you since before you were born," Martha replied. "Now get back in that buggy and go." Jenkins made a sudden move toward Martha. The shotgun roared and he fell back with a cry, clutching his arm. But the exertion was too much for Martha in her weakened state. She swayed, the shotgun barrel dipping. Wade seized the moment, rushing forward to wrench the weapon from her hands. He shoved Martha roughly, sending her sprawling. "Martha!" Clara tried to go to her, but the third man grabbed her, pinning her arms. "Bring her," Wade ordered, gesturing toward the buggy. "We'll finish this in town." Clara fought, kicking and twisting, but the man was too strong. As he dragged her toward the buggy, she saw Martha struggling to rise, blood staining her temple where she'd struck the porch post. "Help!" Clara screamed, though she knew the ranch hands were all out with the cattle and there was no one to hear. "Help us!" A shot cracked across the yard and Wade's hat flew from his head. Everyone froze. Thomas stood at the corner of the house, rifle raised. Behind him were two more ranch hands, both armed. "Next one goes between your eyes, Wade," Thomas said conversationally. "Let her go." The man holding Clara released her so suddenly she stumbled. Wade's face contorted with fury, but he wasn't stupid enough to argue with three armed men. "This isn't over," he snarled as he backed toward the buggy. "Jackson can't protect her forever." "He doesn't have to," Thomas replied. "We will." After Wade and his men departed, Thomas sent one of the hands for the doctor while Clara tended to Martha. The cut on Martha's head wasn't deep, but the doctor insisted she stay in bed for several days. "You shouldn't have tried to face them alone," Clara scolded gently as she bathed Martha's face with cool water. "Wasn't going to let them take you," Martha said, her voice weaker than Clara had ever heard it. "Yates would never forgive me. He'd understand you're not well." Martha's hand caught Clara's. "No, child, you don't understand. That boy cares for you something fierce. Haven't seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you since. Well, ever." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "You're mistaken. He feels responsible for me, that's all." Martha's knowing smile was the only reply. Thomas insisted on posting a guard at the house until Yates returned, taking shifts with the other hands who hadn't gone on the cattle drive. Clara was grateful for their protection, but she found herself watching the road anxiously each day, longing for Yates's return with an intensity that frightened her. 2 more weeks passed. Martha recovered from her cold and the knock on her head, though she tired more easily than before. Clara took on more responsibilities, finding satisfaction in keeping the household running smoothly despite Wade's threats hanging over them. Word came via the stagecoach that the cattle drive had reached Denver successfully and would be starting the return journey soon. Clara tried not to count the days, but found herself doing it anyway. One evening, she sat on the porch with her mending, enjoying the cooler air as twilight settled over the valley. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, her heart leaping with hope. It was Yates, riding alone and ahead of the others. He'd pushed hard to get back, from the look of his trail-worn appearance. When he saw Clara on the porch, his weary face broke into a smile that made her breath catch. He dismounted in a fluid motion and climbed the porch steps in 2 strides. Before Clara could rise, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his dusty ones. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Thomas's message reached me in Denver. If Wade hurt you, I'm fine," Clara assured him. "We're all fine. Thomas and the boys arrived in time." Relief washed over his features, followed immediately by something deeper, more intense. "Clara, on the trail I had a lot of time to think. About my life, about the ranch, about you." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I realized something I should have known from the moment I saw you." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. "What's that?" "That I never want to be away from you again." He took a breath. "I know it's soon. I know you might not feel the same, but I had to tell you that I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Clara looked into his eyes and saw no guile, no hidden agenda, only hope and affection, and a question he was afraid to ask. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. Joy dawned across his face. "It wasn't just you." He rose, drawing her up with him, and then his arms were around her, and his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with shared longing. Clara had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such tenderness and respect mixed with unmistakable passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should at least wash the trail dust off before doing that," Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I didn't notice." "Liar," he teased, then grew serious again. "I want to court you properly, Clara O'Malley, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to make you my wife." The words sent a shiver of happiness through her. "I'd like that," she said softly. Both parts. From inside the house came the sound of Martha clearing her throat loudly. "I believe supper is ready," she called. "If you two can tear yourselves away from each other long enough to eat." They entered the house hand in hand, both smiling too much to be embarrassed at being caught. The next morning, Yates rode into town alone. Clara worried, knowing he intended to confront Wade, but he insisted it was necessary. "I won't have him threatening you or this ranch," he said as he saddled his horse. "This ends today." He returned mid-afternoon, a cut on his cheekbone but otherwise unharmed. "What happened?" Clara asked, dabbing at the cut with a damp cloth. "Wade and I came to an understanding," Yates said, wincing slightly at her ministrations. "He won't be bothering you again." "Did you have to fight him?" Yates's mouth quirked. "He threw the first punch, I threw the last three." His expression sobered. "I also paid him what you supposedly owed with witnesses present. He can't claim you owe him anything now." Clara's hand stilled. "You paid him, after what he did." "Yates, you shouldn't have." "It wasn't about the money," Yates interrupted gently. "It was about making sure he has no legal claim on you, no excuse to come after you again." He caught her hand in his. "Your freedom is worth every cent." Tears stung Clara's eyes. No one had ever fought for her before, not like this. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said with a smile. "Now that I've paid off your debts, you're stuck with me." "Promise," she whispered. His answer was a kiss that left no doubt. The courtship of Clara O'Malley and Yates Jackson became the talk of Silverton that autumn. He took her to church socials, dances, and the Harvest Festival. He brought her wildflowers and books, and once, memorably, a kitten he'd rescued from a coyote. They rode together across the ranch, Yates showing her every hill and valley of what would one day be their shared land. Clara blossomed under his attentions and the respect he showed her. She continued to work alongside Martha, but now she also accompanied Yates when he conducted ranch business in town, learning more about the operation that supported them all. Martha watched their growing love with approval, though she occasionally rolled her eyes at their tendency to get lost in conversation with each other, forgetting whatever task they were supposed to be doing. "Young love," she would mutter, but her eyes were kind. As winter approached, Yates became more serious in his discussions with Clara about their future. "I want to marry you before Christmas," he said one evening as they sat before the fire. "If you're ready," Clara considered. She had known Yates for only 5 months, but they had been the most transformative months of her life. She knew his character, his values, his dreams, and she knew her own heart. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." The wedding took place on the first Sunday in December, with snow dusting the ground outside the small church in Silverton. Martha had helped Clara sew a wedding dress of ivory silk ordered specially from Denver. Yates wore a new suit and his best boots, polished to a mirror shine. The entire town turned out for the ceremony. Even Sheriff Donovan was there, though he kept a weather eye on Barton Wade, who stood at the back with a sullen expression. Wade had lost standing in the community after the story of his treatment of Clara became known, and many of his customers had taken their business elsewhere. Clara walked down the aisle alone, her heart full as she approached the man waiting for her at the altar. As Yates took her hand, he whispered, "You're beautiful." The minister smiled at the young couple before him. "Dearly beloved." The vows were traditional but spoken with deep feeling. When Yates promised to love, honor, and cherish Clara for all his days, his voice rang with conviction. Clara's response was equally firm, despite the happy tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Yates cradled Clara's face in his hands as if she were made of precious glass, then kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the ladies in the congregation sigh audibly. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by every household in Silverton. There was dancing and laughter and perhaps a bit too much of the punch that Thomas had liberally spiked when no one was looking. As evening fell, Yates led Clara to the waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and tin cans by the mischievous ranch hands. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Jackson?" he asked, helping her up. Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. That night, in the privacy of what was now their shared bedroom, Clara discovered another facet of love. Yates was as gentle and considerate a lover as he was a man, guiding her through her first experience of physical intimacy with patience and care. Their union was both tender and passionate, a fitting beginning to their life together. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Clara traced the contours of her husband's face in the dim light of the banked fire. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Winter settled over the Lazy J, bringing short days and long nights perfect for newlyweds. Clara and Yates established their routine, working together during the day and discovering each other during the evenings. Martha pretended to grumble about the lovebirds underfoot, but she couldn't hide her pleasure at seeing the ranch house filled with laughter again. She had worried about Yates for years after his parents' deaths and his sister's tragic end. Now, she told Clara privately, she could die happy knowing he wouldn't be alone. "Not that I'm planning on it anytime soon," she added hastily. "Someone has to teach you how to make a proper Christmas pudding." Christmas at the Lazy J that year was the most joyous the ranch had seen in a long time. Yates and the hands cut a massive pine from the hillside and set it up in the parlor, where Clara and Martha decorated it with popcorn strings, paper ornaments, and candles carefully placed for safety. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner with Martha and Thomas, Yates presented Clara with a small box wrapped in red paper. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Jackson," he said, his eyes dancing with anticipation. Inside the box was a gold locket, oval-shaped and engraved with delicate flowers. When Clara opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Yates on one side. The other side was empty. "For our first child," Yates explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Whenever that may be. No pressure." Clara closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. "It's perfect," she said. "And I hope we don't have to wait too long to fill that space." Yates's smile lit up his entire face. "Really, really." Clara handed him a package of her own. "Now open yours." He unwrapped it eagerly to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool that matched his eyes. "You made this." "Martha helped," Clara admitted. "I'm still learning." He wound it around his neck immediately. "I'll wear it every day." Later, as they prepared for bed, Yates pulled Clara into his arms. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," he said. "Because of you." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Every day with you is a gift," she whispered. "From the moment you stopped Wade from hitting me, you've been saving me." Yates tilted her chin up to look into her eyes. "You've got it backward, Clara. You saved me. I was just existing before you came into my life. Now I'm living." Spring came to the Lazy J with a riot of wildflowers and the birth of new calves. Clara had taken to ranch life completely, riding out with Yates when weather permitted, helping with the spring branding, and continuing to keep the house with Martha, whose arthritis was growing worse. It was on a perfect May morning that Clara woke with a certainty she hadn't felt before. She watched Yates as he dressed for the day, admiring the play of muscles beneath his skin. "I think I'm with child," she said quietly. Yates froze in the act of pulling on his shirt. "What did you say? I'm late. 3 weeks now, and I've been feeling different." Clara sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I am. We're going to have a baby." In 2 strides, Yates was at the bedside, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of joy that likely woke Martha in the next room. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. He placed a hand gently on Clara's still flat stomach. "Our baby." "You're happy then?" Clara asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He kissed her deeply. "I love you, Clara Jackson. More than I have words to say." The news of Clara's pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Martha immediately began planning for the baby's arrival, setting aside the finest linens for a cradle and starting a quilt that would incorporate scraps from both Yates's and Clara's clothing. "For the little one to be wrapped in their parents' love," she explained when Clara questioned the sentiment. As summer progressed and Clara's condition became more evident, Yates grew increasingly protective. He insisted on her resting during the hottest part of the day and fretted when she continued with her normal duties. "The women in my family have always worked right up until their time," Clara reminded him when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "I'm with child, not made of glass." "Humor me," he replied, keeping the basket. "I've never done this before," Clara relented, recognizing that his concern came from love. "Fine. You can hang the sheets while I supervise." In October, as the aspen leaves turned gold on the mountainsides, Clara's time came. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Yates paced the parlor, deaf to Thomas's attempts at distraction and Martha's assurances that everything was proceeding normally. When the doctor emerged from the bedroom, wiping his hands on a towel, Yates nearly knocked him over in his haste. "Well," he demanded. The doctor smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Jackson, you have a healthy daughter." Yates sagged against the wall in relief. "And Clara?" "Tired, as you'd expect, but doing well. You can go in now." Clara lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in the quilt Martha had made. When she saw Yates, her smile deepened. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Yates approached the bed as if in a dream. The tiny face peering from the blankets was red and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair on her perfect head. As he watched, the baby's eyes opened, unfocused but unmistakably blue like his own. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to touch her cheek with one trembling finger. "Like her mother." "We need a name," Clara said, watching the love bloom across her husband's face. Yates thought for a moment. "What about Emily Martha?" "For my sister and for the woman who's been like a mother to us both," Clara nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Emily Martha Jackson. It's perfect." Little Emily thrived, growing from a fragile newborn to a chubby, laughing baby with remarkable speed. She had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the first moment. And even Martha, who claimed to be too old for such nonsense, could often be found singing the child to sleep or telling her stories as if she could understand every word. On Emily's first birthday, the entire community gathered at the Lazy J to celebrate. There was a feast spread on tables in the yard, music from a fiddle and banjo, and plenty of admiration for the guest of honor, who was walking now and getting into everything. As twilight fell and the party began to wind down, Clara found Yates watching their daughter toddle after a butterfly, her face alight with determination. "Penny for your thoughts," Clara said, slipping her arm through his. "I was just thinking how lucky I am," he replied, pulling her close. 3 years ago I was alone, just going through the motions. Now I have you and Emily," and he stopped abruptly, looking at her with sudden suspicion. "Clara Jackson, are you keeping secrets from me?" Clara laughed, unable to maintain the surprise she'd planned. "Not for much longer, apparently. You always could read me too well." She guided his hand to her stomach, still flat but soon to change. "Emily will have a brother or sister next spring." Yates's face went through a comical series of expressions: shock, joy, concern, and back to joy. "Are you sure? Is it too soon? Are you feeling all right?" "Yes, I'm sure. No, it's not too soon, and I'm feeling wonderful." Clara stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "We're building our family, Yates, just as we dreamed." He swept her up in an embrace, careful despite his enthusiasm. "I love you," he said against her hair. "More every day." The years that followed brought more children to the Jackson family, a son they named Thomas James for the loyal foreman. Another daughter they called Rose for the wildflowers. Yates still brought Clara on special occasions. And finally, when they thought their family complete, twin boys who arrived in a dramatic midnight delivery that had Yates pacing so frantically he wore a path in the parlor rug. The Lazy J prospered as well. Under Yates and Clara's joint management, the ranch expanded to include more grazing land and a small apple orchard that became Clara's special project. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though the original ranch house was preserved for Martha, who refused to leave her domain despite her advancing years. Barton Wade left Silverton the winter after Emily's birth, his business having declined to the point of failure. Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication when she heard the news, but mostly she was simply grateful that chapter of her life was closed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Clara with a trip to San Francisco, their first real journey away from the ranch and children. Martha, now assisted by a younger woman named Sarah, shooed them off with promises that everything would be fine in their absence. "5 children and a ranch can survive 2 weeks without you," she said firmly. "Go and remember what it's like to be just the two of you for a while." The city was a revelation to Clara, who had never seen the ocean or buildings taller than 3 stories. They stayed in a grand hotel, ate in restaurants where the silverware gleamed and the wine flowed freely, and walked arm in arm along the wharf watching ships from distant lands unload exotic cargo. But the best moments were the quiet ones, waking beside Yates without a child's cry demanding attention, talking late into the night about their hopes for the children's futures, making love with an abandon they rarely found time for at home. On their last night in San Francisco, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching the sunset paint the bay in gold and crimson. "Any regrets?" Yates asked, his arms around her waist from behind. "About the life we've made together?" Clara leaned back against his chest, considering the question seriously. "Not one," she said finally. "Even the hard parts, Wade, the difficult births, the drought 2 years ago, they all led us here. I wouldn't change a thing." Yates turned her in his arms to face him. At 40, he was more handsome than ever, with silver threading through his hair at the temples and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe it's time to let Thomas take over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. I want to spend more time with you and the children while they're still young enough to want our company." Clara smiled, touching his face with gentle fingers. "I'd like that. Emily's already talking about school in Denver, and Thomas Jr. is growing so fast. Before we know it, they'll all be gone." "Not gone," Yates corrected. "Just making their own lives as they should, but I want to enjoy every moment we have with them now." Upon their return to the Lazy J, they found the children thriving under Martha and Sarah's care. though all five tackled them with hugs and a barrage of questions about their journey. Martha looked on with satisfaction, her once dark hair now completely white but her spirit undimmed. "Did you have a good time?" she asked when the children had been dispatched to wash for dinner. "Wonderful," Clara answered, embracing the older woman, "but it's good to be home." Martha patted her cheek. "Where you belong." That night, after the children were asleep, and the house had settled into the familiar creaks and sighs of an old building at rest, Clara and Yates sat on the porch swing, a quilt wrapped around them against the autumn chill. "I was thinking about the day we met," Clara said, watching the stars emerge above the silhouette of the mountains. "How strange that one terrible moment could lead to all of this happiness." Yates's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not strange. Meant to be. I believe that with all my heart." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "The moment I saw you standing up to Wade despite your fear, I knew you were someone special. I just didn't know you'd become everything to me." Clara turned her face up to his, marveling that after all these years her heart still quickened at his touch. "I love you, Yates Jackson. Thank you for saving me that day." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, and bent to kiss her as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall around them, soft as promises kept and gentle as love that endures.